Good evening, and welcome to the MBBC's coverage of the Devolved Elections. I'm Twisted Nuke. Tonight, we will be reporting on the results of two nations going to the polls today. In Scotland, will we see the Nationalists returned with a new mandate to govern, perhaps alone? Or will it be the turn of Dunk's 11, or another unionist party, to form a new government and completely change the direction of Scottish politics? And in Northern Ireland, what will happen to the collapsed Sinn Féin vote? Will the Nationalists continue to hold on to seats, or will we see the Assembly thrown into political crisis? Tonight we will find out. We will answer these crucial questions. In the studio I shall be joined by Eurojack, whose Irish name I'm not going to try and pronounce. Good evening.
Hello.
So, what are your thoughts on the elections? I know your specialty is more towards Northern Ireland, but what are the trends you think we may see tonight?
I think that there's definitely going to be a big decline in the nationalist vote in Northern Ireland, and I'm anticipating a big win for nationalists in Scotland, with the Greens and the SNP likely being able to form a majority by themselves if some of the exit polls are right.
And what would that mean if there's a pure SNP Green government, perhaps with a majority? What would that mean for Scotland's place in the Union?
It could mean another indie ref. It might also not mean another indie ref. It really depends on how well organised the Green Party is and how they can, and if they can keep their government stable.
Yes, that will indeed be the crucial test. And tonight, if anyone would like to join us on the stream, you're welcome to do so. There's a link to join the server, and announcements will pipe you in. And so, with only seconds to go, hopefully we shall have our first result coming in soon.
All right. And if you're looking for a quick guide to the pronunciation of my name, it's Gá Réalt Jig.
Well, there you go, folks. I'm still not going to try it, but there we go. So, we have our first result coming in momentarily. And the first result is in Lanarkshire. We see that the Greens have managed to hold Lanarkshire with a significant vote share, a majority of 53,136. This seeing off Labour challenger Sir Equity Salami and the Libertarians. Now also note that the Conservatives and the the SUP have been completely obliterated here. They've both lost their deposits. So we need to see if that trend pans out for this evening. And here the Libertarians were backed up by endorsements from the Classical Liberals and Liberal Democrats. So this is not a seat clearly that's changing hands easily.
Yeah, it's predictably a big Green game, and I don't really see if this will act as a bellwether for the rest of the night. I can't tell if it is greater or worse than what the Scottish Greens expected.
Yes, it's very hard to judge because, of course, of the boundary reforms. So while we can say more or less who held the seat, we can't really say where their support demographic was. So it could well be that other chunks of previous seats have, greatly different bases that we'd expect in terms of party support. We'll just have to wait and see. So at this point, we have to consider how effective endorsements will be. So we've seen a great deal of cooperation, particularly between Liberal parties in this election. So the question will be, will that pay off? Or will there be a sort of disenfranchisement as Lib Dem voters are told, for example, in Lanarkshire to vote Libertarian? They'll still have the lists, of course, and in fact now there's 2 list regions, so the power of the lists is even greater. But the important question has to be asked, will this lead to further disenfranchisement? And also, just looking at the Conservatives and the Scottish Unionists, we've seen a punishing result, really punishing. So we have to wonder there whether that will pan out for the rest of the night, whether this is a fluke. And also, we have to wonder whether this majority will pan out, or whether this is just the beginning of the night. The lefts tend to do quite well in the early hours, more metropolitan areas voting. So we'll just have to wait and see. But it will certainly be interesting to find out if this is an effect that pans out across the rest of Scotland, or whether it doesn't. It's very difficult to tell at this point. As Jack said, you can't take this as a bellwether. It's not too easily. So while I have your attention, I'd just like to thank Dunks for doing these fantastic graphics. They're top quality as ever. And it's beautiful graphics. So now we just await our next system. And while I have you, I might as well go over some of the sort of changes that have happened since the last election. So we've seen seats generally broken up quite a lot more. The Scottish Parliament has expanded quite significantly. And now we have 2 list regions, and this could cause some interesting outcomes, because what we could see is we could see parties perhaps doing very well on first past the post in one area, but because of the 2 list regions being entirely separate, they might become overrepresented in the other. So that is the question we'll have to see. We'll have to see what effects these new systems have. And so, as I said earlier, we're quite happy to have anyone who would care to come as a guest to come on. Right, and we're now able to head over to Northern Ireland, where we have the first round that has begun, and immediately we've seen Fianna Fáil successfully elect a candidate. Oh, and he's coming back right now. So, Fianna Fáil have just successfully elected a candidate, the only candidate to be elected in round 1. From there, we're seeing that although they've managed to elect a candidate in the first round, they don't have the largest vote share. They've come in second place for the first preferences, significantly behind the Ulster Unionists, who have more than double their vote share. They've far exceeded the other parties. And then after the Fianna Fáil candidate, who's been initially elected, we have the SDLP's Comrade Lannister, the Alliance Esteban, and then Fianna Fáil again with Zoto 888. And the Ulster Unionists significantly behind. So it's possible the Ulster Unionists will benefit from transfer votes. But although the party votes are quite good, it's important to note that, of course, they have a lot more candidates. So this can mean that even though they've got significantly more party votes, it will appear that they're having less support. So we just have to follow this.
I'm just back to this result, one that's very delightful for me. Very pleased to be elected as the only candidate to be elected in round 1.
Yes,
this is an interesting result.
It does seem like Fianna Fáil has managed to recapture the support of Sinn Féin.
Seems like it. I'm glad that we've managed to do that. And obviously there's been a pretty stunning rejection by the electorate of Northern Ireland First.
Yes, that's certainly a rough result.
Shows that low effort campaigning is not going to pay off.
So I think that... Oh, go on.
Sorry, I just think that the DUP could end up being damaged by this, because if I remember correctly, they are running three candidates.
Quite possibly. I don't know off the top of my head. So yeah, that doesn't look like a good showing so far, does it?
It's not a good showing for the DUP or the SDLP, and the SDLP could have been damaged by their final debate performance.
What's your reading of sort of the lead up to the formation of Fianna Fáil, and particularly the collapse of Sinn Féin?
Well, Fianna Fáil was originally to be formed as an alternative nationalist voice, as was revealed in our first post announcing the formation of our Northern Irish branch. But what ended up happening was that Sinn Féin did collapse as a result of increased competition on the nationalist side and the departure of many talented leaders from the party. And Fianna Fáil had no choice but to take up the mantle and to ensure that nationalists were ensured representation in the north.
And when we look at the other parties, generally they could be described as soft nationalists. Do you think there's any reason why they're particularly keen not to sort of drift over to nationalism directly?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
With sort of the other parties, they could be described as soft nationalist in many ways. So can you see any reason? Yes. So could you see any reason why they'd be sort of uncomfortable with shifting over and being full nationalist?
Well, I think that many nationalist voters have voted Alliance and SDLP for quite a while because they were afraid of very swift change. And I think that maybe a steady hand of another party that is willing to compromise would be more attractive to them. Or not willing to compromise, but compromises written into their constitutions, essentially. And we'll bring in the leader of the SDLP right now, Comrade Lannister. Hello.
Ah, wonderful, we found something. I hear they've all been trapped outside in the lobby.
Ah, hello.
Hello.
Well, this is a very exciting result indeed.
What isn't exciting is
Uh,
my ticker's broken. It's frozen.
uh,
Oh, now it's working. Ah,
it would seem that I have been chosen as the second favourite candidate, not by a great margin, but that is quite a lot of progress for the SDLP to have made from the last Devolved Elections.
So you believe it's progress on your last result?
I believe it is, yes, because to be able to have the second highest candidate with two candidates running is quite an achievement in my opinion.
Do you think that there's still a chance that you'll win 2 seats?
I do not think that there's a chance that we'll win 2 seats. I think it's very unlikely. However much I would love for it to be so, I think that it is really not very likely at all.
So do you feel this result has reaffirmed your position as the SDLP leader?
I think it definitely has, yes.
And what about the name of the SDLP, which appeared to be a very controversial issue in the last few days of the campaign, and particularly the night before the election? What is the
Well,
next step for the SDLP from here?
well, as I did say, I have to review into the naming of the SDLP, and the party is looking into the issue.
make this quick, don't come in.
And we will see what happens. We will see what comes of it. So I cannot say anything about any potential name of the SDLP or.
Has there been any
Yet.
resistance from senior Labour figures about it?
Um. Uh.
Okay.
Okay,
Have we
I'm
got any
afraid
results
I'm going to
declared?
have to interrupt. We are now going to Ayrshire, which is back in Scotland, and we've got the next returned result. And we've seen Labour very narrowly hold on to Ayrshire with 343
We
votes.
appear to be declaring Ayrshire, which appears to be a Labour hold.
That's surprisingly close considering that the amount of effort Will Shakespeare put into his campaign. That is true.
And to talk about this result, we have another member of the Labour Party joining us in studio, Cabinet Minister Elliot C99.
Good evening.
So what's your take on this result?
It's a fantastic successful Will campaign incredibly hard. I know Fox also a massive congratulations to him because it was such a tight campaign that's reflected in the results. But I think we expected to hold the seat close, and we thought it was going to be could go either way. But we're glad we've held on to the seat.
And how do you think this reflects on the future prospects or the prospects for the rest of the night for Labour and Holyrood?
I think we're going to see us maintaining our position, maybe a slight increase. I don't see us. I think we'll keep our seats at probably around two MSPs. I expect we will. That's what we expect by the end of the night.
But isn't that disappointing because the Parliament's increased, so that is, in real terms, a drop in vote power?
I wouldn't know. I wouldn't consider that a decrease at all. No, not at all. It's 2 seats.
And the Scottish Government have been much lambasted for failing to deliver a programme for government and pretty much barely scraping through making a budget. So do you think it's still a viable government?
We're 2 results into the night. I don't think I can predict what the government's going to be.
Oh, not even electorally. I'm just talking about purely on the basis of could the government potentially function if the parliamentary arithmetic is tolerant to it.
Yeah, 100%. Why not? It's worked for the last 2 terms now. I don't see why not. They've done a lot of stuff this term that's been very positive for Scotland, and they face until the latter stage of this term any real challenges from any other parties in Holyrood.
And so, what happens if it is the same government? Where does the government go from there?
I think they continue progressing with their agenda to improve Scotland, to make it a fairer society for all. I see it heading in the same positive direction it's currently heading in.
And if the polling we've seen is correct, the SNP have made impressive gains. So does that make the union untenable?
Not at all, no. As I'm sure voters remember, when the Scottish referendum was held on independence in 2014, we were told it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and I believe it's going to stay that way. Unless we see radical changes, which I personally don't see happening. I don't see there being a desire for a Scottish referendum, because the Scottish is so assuming, as the polls is just suggesting, that having a Scottish Green SNP coalition. I don't think they're both single issue parties, and I don't think just because of those election results we can say there's a desire for independence.
Okay, Comrade Lannister, would you generally agree with what's been said?
I must say that I would. Yes, I think that it's definitely, if the exit poll is correct, it gives the Scottish government an obvious mandate to continue taking Scotland in the direction that it is. As regards to a potential independence referendum, my political position as leader of the SDLP with regards to other devolved assemblies forces me to express no comment.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to be going to Fife and the Forth Valley now. And we've seen a very surprising result here. The Greens have gained from the Liberal Democrats in a landslide. This has gone from a Liberal Democrat held seat to a Green held seat of a majority of 34,354, with the Green candidate Alajav Free managing to secure the seat, beating out Liberal Democrat CJ Rowans, who has barely scored above the third candidate El Chapotato of the Labour Party. We're also seeing the first constituencies where the PAP and Scotland First stood, both of which have performed tolerably for a new party, but nowhere near what they were hoping, I'm sure, with the PAP's DF44 reaching only 18k votes, and Answer Me Now of Scotland First only reaching 17,000. However, they have both beaten the Conservative candidate. This is increasingly looking like a Conservative wipeout. Would anyone like to come in?
Well, I'd say a massive congratulations to Chapotato, who's I think done better than most expected. But I think, just commenting on the other results, the bottom 3, I think it just shows the decline of the right and the lack of impact the DF4 Force Party, the former Prime Minister, has been able to make in Scotland and on this election.
Well, on the point of the decline of the right, in previous seats, for example, we've seen the Libertarians twice. They've done reasonably well. They've secured 42,000 votes, 34,000 votes. So wouldn't it be more fair to say it's a decline of the Scottish Conservatives?
I think it's early in the night. It's hard to say completely, but from what I'm seeing at the moment, I'd say it's a decline of the right in Scotland in general. I'd be surprised tonight if I think there's a potential for them not to win a single constituency seat. Of course, I think they will get list seats.
I also would like to jump in quickly and say I'm not necessarily sure that it's a decline in the right. I think it is especially a wipeout for the Conservative Party, and it's likely not to gain them any seats because of the way that they handled the welfare devolution referendum.
Well, the proof will be in the pudding, of course, because if that's true, we could expect to see a similar backlash against, say, the classical Liberals, who officially endorsed the abstention campaign. So we can test that theory. Now, I'd like to ask your thoughts on the PAP, because they're a fairly new pop-up party, and they seem like an interesting discussion point.
They're a new challenge on the scene, one that we in the Labour Party take very seriously, and obviously they haven't been able to make the impact they've wanted to so far in this seat, with I'd say a very recognisable candidate.
I would say that it would be very interesting to see how many votes they receive in this election, because obviously being a relatively new party, them getting 18,000 votes in their first campaign is, I would say, not a bad achievement.
And where do you think these votes come from? From other parties, from non-voters?
I think, like with any new arrival, a substantial portion of their votes come from non-voters. I think their campaign has been more oriented around them rather than attacking other parties as well, which would definitely contribute to that.
And going back to the Scottish Conservatives, you discussed maybe this being a backlash against their handling of the welfare referendum. But would you both think that could be enough to explain it entirely, or do you think there's something more fundamental wrong in their party structure?
I don't think they, in this election, potentially put enough convincing argument for voters to vote for them from a purely, neutral. If I took my party political hat off, it's quite obviously they haven't done enough to win over the voters. After being so strong in Scotland, a decline would be certainly worrying for party leaders.
And if I may ask you to put your party political hat back on, can you see this as perhaps a backlash against the government your party has formed nationally with them? Oh, I think we've lost him. Oh, no, he's back.
Yeah, I'm back. Yeah, sorry. The elections are for the Scottish Parliament, and I'd suggest that voters vote based on what they've seen in what they want to see in the Scottish Parliament, not in the national government.
Okay, well, we'll have to leave it there because it's time to go back to Northern Ireland. And in Northern Ireland, round 2 has been completed, and Northern Ireland First has been excluded completely. They have not secured enough further preferences to carry on, and so they have been completely excluded from in the second round. This means no Northern Ireland First candidates can be elected. The current front runner is Fianna Fáil's Zoto 888. This is still after the initial Fianna Fáil candidate, whose name I'm still not going to pronounce, was successfully elected. Comrade Lannister, you're in second place, with the Alliance Esteban 06 in third, and the 3 Ulster Unionist candidates behind.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but has Zoto just overtaken Lannister?
Unfortunately.
And Esteban?
Yes. I believe his previous position was second. I should get that double checked.
I don't think that was. I don't.
Oh no, his place was third. Yes, he's shot up.
Yeah, good. It's a very good night for Fianna Fáil so far, and with some more transfers from other parties, I can see us taking 2 seats.
Of course, the Ulster Unionists are still very strong. 3 candidates and about 50,000 votes each. But I would suggest they're still in for getting a fair number of seats in the Assembly.
Could it likely be that the Ulster Unionists will probably take the mantle of unionism on forwards? It won't be the DUP sort of replacing them, just looking at these party vote shares.
Yeah, I'd suggest that the DUP have well and truly declined in Northern Ireland, and the UUP have probably taken on that vote.
Despite the discount, there does certainly seem to be a degree of transferability between national parliaments of parties and their devolved parties, because we're seeing disappointing results, admittedly less disappointing than in Scotland, between the SUP and DUP, which of course are subsidiaries of the National Unionists. And so it's not looking like it's a good night for the NUP and their devolved parties.
You're right there about the devolved parties. That they are going to differ substantially from the national vote, because Northern Ireland is a very different place to the rest of the country. For example, I think Fianna Fáil I think that Dina Sear are going to do a lot better in Northern Ireland than they're doing in Scotland right now. And I think that it just goes to show that Northern Ireland is a very different place. And I think that there's certainly been a bit of retribution against national parties in the past who have deposed Northern Irish leaders for not towing the line on their national policy. And I think that Northern Irish voters might be getting sick of that kind of thing.
Yes, there's certainly been quite a degree of political instability. See if I can say that word properly. And so we're going to try and pile in El Chapotato. I believe we have him ready and waiting. Or maybe we're not. Any luck?
I'll bring him in.
Ah, wonderful.
Hey.
Hello.
All right, testing. Yeah.
Yep, we can hear you. Right, welcome to the stream.
Great.
So what are your thoughts on the results so far tonight?
All right, so I thought like we're doing fairly well. It's just well, it's nice to see if we've already Scottish Labour has won a constituency. Personally, I'm hoping for 3 seats. So I feel like being able to win a constituency, we're getting there. And now it's just tonight is seeing how the rest of our candidates go and see if we can get some less seats. Of course, yeah, I feel like Scottish Labour has tried very hard in this campaign, especially with people in our party, such as say Wilk Shakespeare. He has done a tremendous job of managing the campaign, and also we have people like Secretary Salami, who has done a fairly well campaign in his constituency too. And yeah, we had some hiccups here, but tonight I feel like we could do. I'm optimistic, but it's just let's see what happens.
Okay, so if I can drag you over to Northern Ireland, what's your take on what's happened so far?
Well, for me, generally I'm more so in the Scars thing. Northern Ireland has been more so if something that's pretty removed from me. I know I feel like the whole thing with the I feel like it's going to be pretty unionist this time, though. It sucks to see the more nationalist side not get a more representation. I feel like our wing being SDLP has been other for a while, so I feel like there should be a more equal representation. Therefore, I feel like the nationalist side is not providing that sort of equal, more fairly big representation, but. Yeah, the Scottish people, the Northern Irish people should speak on this matter for themselves. I feel like, yeah, the UUP is gonna do pretty well tonight.
And that's a big question we have right now. I'm wondering, is the UUP is actually the big wild card, because they're running 8 candidates and their vote is split, it's either 7 or 8 candidates that they're running, and their vote's very split right now. And it's interesting to see if they will be punished by this split in their votes, and how many candidates they will get elected. So I believe their internal target's 4, but we could see them only ending up with 3 votes, depending on how their down ballot candidates end up splitting.
And how does this usually play out in regards to previous elections? Does it usually end up as a punishment or as a benefit?
Northern Irish voters are quite divided, sectarian, or at least they were until quite recently, since most parties have begun trying to campaign on reconciliation-based platforms and acting as other parties, even when they're unionist or nationalist. So as a result, there's been a lot more fluid votes. For example, in the Northern Irish by-election, the New Unionists won a seat based on transfers from Republican Sinn Féin, which were a far-left communist revolutionary party. And without their transfers, the New Unionists wouldn't have won their seat.
Okay, thank you for your insight. We're going back to Scotland, where we have the results for Aberdeen. In Aberdeen, the Scottish National Party have gained from the Conservatives. The Conservatives have significantly declined in vote share, and the second party is now the Classical Liberals, the Classical Liberal candidate, having a 13,682 vote gap between himself and the Scottish Nationalists' daring philosopher. As you can see, the Conservatives have dropped down from leading this seat to having 19,207 votes, which is certainly not the result they were hoping for. And we're seeing Labour's Nucharco, who remains standing after being sort of ejected from his party, following a very controversial campaign, coming in 4th place with 10,410 votes. The PAP candidate with a very mild 137 votes. Far less impressive than their previous performance.
I admit I was more focused on the Northern Irish campaign than my Scottish seat, but I really do thank Zoto for his involvement in Northern Ireland.
Play nicely, children. So thank you very much for joining us. I think we're going to try and rotate some guests now. And so we'll see who we can get next. And we've also just heard there's being a recount in the seat of Highlands and Islands. It was apparently very close and within tens of votes, and so it was requested for a recount. So we'll see how that comes out.
And I'm bringing our next slate of guests in. 2 or 3? Give me a number.
Let's have 2. Let's have 2.
All right. I'll bring in the 2 that have been waiting the longest. Hello, Victor H.R. and Weebrew.
Hello.
Oh, yes.
Hang on, Victor. We're going to try and pipe you up a bit.
Sit closer to the microphone there.
I've boosted him. He's at full gain. Full gain!
Fantastic. So, what are your takes on the results so far? We'll start with Victor.
Or maybe we won't. Are you there, Victor?
Yes. Hello.
Hello. So,
Well, it's a great result. Obviously, we've got an S&P gain from the. Can you hear me?
yes, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Oh.
Right. Okay, we've lost him again. Right. Let's go to Weebrew. Hello, Weebrew.
Hello. Yes, obviously I focus in Scotland. We had Sinn Féin in Northern Ireland. We'll not talk about that, just brush over that. But for Scottish Greens, obviously we're pretty happy with the results so far. Hopefully we'll be looking at a couple more seats to come. It's great to see us actually have a gain already. It hopefully is looking up for us.
And what do you think is the next port of call if, for example, the SNP and the Greens take a majority of the seats in Holyrood? Do you think it's time for another independence referendum?
Obviously, I'm Deputy Principal Speaker for Greens, so I support independence, obviously. And I'd be extremely happy to see the Greens and the SNP go into coalition and in government in Scotland. I don't think I can make a call now to see if we would be calling an independence referendum or not, because to me, looking at it from both sides, there's a majority support, at least in seats, for independence in Scotland, if that was to happen, if we believe the opinion polls. However, there are more unionist parties, and there's a lot of things that could go into a debate there. So I don't think I'll obviously say anything definitive right now. I wouldn't be surprised if we don't call one.
So at what point does it become acceptable to hold another referendum? Because it was intended as a once-in-a-lifetime vote, but of course people can change their minds. So what's the criteria under which it becomes acceptable to have another?
Well, the thing about it being once in a lifetime, once in a generation, I think was the term that was used. We have now Brexit, and that has completely thrown everything upside down, left and right. And the thing is that Scotland, as you've seen, both in the single market referendum and in the just the European Union referendum, voted overwhelmingly to remain. So our views better be listened to, or else there's going to be a lot of trouble. Let's be honest here, we're not being listened to. The rest of the UK voted to leave the single market. Every single constituency, if I recall correctly, voted to remain in the single market, and it's the same with the EU referendum in general. Every single constituency voted to remain. 63%, I think, is the figure that comes to head.
Well, yes, but at the same time, Scotland did decide to stay in, and with that comes the understanding that having less population, Scotland will inevitably have less of a say. I mean, you can't expect simply equal say despite having far, far less population, surely.
Well, at least a say would be pretty good. And furthermore, I think that when we look at Scotland and the way that we voted, yes, we might have a smaller population, but when thinking back in 2014, a lot of the campaigning for voting to remain in the Union was keep Scotland in the EU, secure Scotland's place in Europe was a line that was used quite a lot in 2014. Obviously, that hasn't happened. There are promises that the No campaign have been ripping up in front of our eyes, and it seems like, if you're looking at the votes, Scottish people aren't happy about it.
Okay, so we're going to have another crack with Victor, but before we do, I believe we have further results come in. We do indeed. In fact, if we can pump in the man, we've got Dunks 11 of who's standing in the constituency we're about to go to, Angus and Sterling. Yes, if you could bring him in, that would be great. Oh dear. Okay. Well, he's going to get an ego, isn't he? He's just won. Dunks 11 has gained the seat of Angus Perth and Sterling with a majority of 16,951, beating out the SNP's Cozier Squire 18. With third candidate from the PAP, David Swift, coming with only 8,000 votes. It's a sort of more midpoint between two previous examples. And we've also seen Labour and the SUP having a near wipeout. Now, Dunks, don't get too big of a head, but you're live.
It is amazing that we have gained the seat of Angus Perth and Sterling on the third attempt trying to gain the Scotland 5 2 times previously, and it's very good that people have chosen myself rather than the nationalists today.
And will you apologise for making this map look absolutely disgusting? Ugh, yeah, it looks awful. We've got a bit of sort of SNP kind of yellow up in the top right. We've got a big blob of grey. Then we've got like some green and some reds. Ugh, it's disgusting. What have you done to Scotland?
Give it a few elections, and that awful yellow thing up in Aberdeen will be turned grey. We'll probably move down to Edinburgh and Glasgow and all that as well. Those will be turned grey, and before long the entire map will be grey and Scotland's executive will be restored.
See, I knew we'd get a big head. So we're going to have another go with Victor. Are you there?
Hello.
Hello. So let's give it another crack. What do you think of what's happening so far?
Well, I think so far things are going really great. I mean, the SNP are still on one seat, but there's still the Highlands and Edinburgh, Glasgow. So we're expecting a minimum of 3 seats with the SNP. I'd also like to congratulate Dunks 11 on winning Dundee. Of course, that was expected, but still, he spent a lot of time campaigning there. And he deserves the seat. Although I mean, there is something if the SNP won it.
There's something interesting what you said there. Congratulations on winning Dundee. In 2014, Dundee was I believe it was the most yes voting local authority, and well, look what's just happened.
Well, people are certainly allowed to change their minds. Now, this is an open question, so anyone please feel free to come in, although not at the same time. What's your reading with the collapse of the Conservatives and the NUP? Specifically here, they did stand down to endorse the classical Liberals in return for an endorsement in the Borders. But we saw them drop considerably in previous constituencies, in some constituencies returning less than 1,000 votes for them. What's your reading on this, and where do they go from here?
Personally, in those constituencies, I didn't really think they were campaigning too much. We'll have to see how things go in the Borders and everything, but certainly looking at where they started a very long time ago to now, there is a collapse. I'm not sure if they'll recover from that, how sustained it will be throughout the night, but it's hard to draw any other conclusion.
It's very possible that we'll see a classical Liberals become the #1 unionist force in Scotland. Not certainly looking forward to it.
He's going to get a big head, be careful. Wait till we've chucked him out first. Once we've got him out of the studio, then you can praise him, not while he's in it. So, if we can go back to, say, the PAP, and I'm interested to hear your take on this, Dunks, and for everyone. So what's your thoughts on this party, and do they have any viability?
Well, we've only seen 2 of their seats standing to declare.
We've seen 3 so far.
3, sorry. I can't say they've done particularly well in any of them. If they don't get any seats, then, well, I can't see them staying together. If they get a seat on the list or something, maybe, but I wouldn't put too much money on it either way.
Well, their best result so far has been 18,478, which put them in 4th place in Fife and the Forth Valley, which isn't a horrendous result for a new party, but it's been very variable. So their worst result so far was in Aberdeen, where they came with 137 votes, which, you know, that's a deposit gone.
That was me.
500 quid the number 2 again.
My deposit is gone.
Ah, what a pity. So,
I do think that the PAP. What do you think about the fact that there's a good chance that their leader could be very popular, as he seems to be a big figurehead within the party, quite a controversial figure, admittedly. Soto 888.
He's standing in the Highlands, I believe, so
Yes.
we'll wait for the result there.
And it looks like he's about to be elected as an MLA in Stormont, so.
Well, Ryanair will like him anyway.
Those are going to be some fun flights for him if he's going to have to fly every day from Scotland to Northern Ireland.
That's a busy job.
Fly down from Inverness to Edinburgh, go to Scottish Parliament, and then go across to Belfast to the Assembly.
I think a metaphor about parachuting could be made, but I obviously can't due to the non-partisan nature of the BBC.
As I routinely said during my last election campaign in Cumbria, carpetbagger.
Oh dear. So we can now have more results.
Kick them across the Irish Sea.
No, throw them out quickly. It's too late. We're going back to Northern Ireland actually, and it's now round 7. They've been really cracking on, and
checked a couple of guests.
we've seen the SDLP's second candidate be eliminated. Their first candidate, Conrad Lannister, is remaining in, although he's dropped down to 4th place. The front runner is still Zoto 888. With the Ulster Unionist Seals Madge and Comped coming up in 2nd and 3rd place. And the Alliance candidate Esteban 06 has been knocked back to 5th place from, I believe, he started in 3rd. So this going less well for Alliance, but it's looking like this is the point at which things start to swing towards Ulster, the Unionists.
And joining us in studio, we have the Deputy First Minister and the leader of the Ulster Unionists, Elsa Madge. Who may... Hello,
Can you hear
Niels?
us? Oh, what a pity.
We may be having some technical difficulties. I'm sure we'll get him in soon.
So, Dunks, your party stood down in favour...
Hello.
Oh, here he
never
is.
mind,
There
we've
we
got
go.
it. Okay.
Yeah, I'm here.
So what are you? So you've just shot up into 2nd, and 3rd rather, considering
Yeah.
there's already a candidate elected.
Of course. Well, firstly, congratulations on being elected in the first round. I
Thank you very
I
much.
thought it might happen because you have such a solid debate performance, and it's useful being the only nationalist party as well. Firstly, I may say that my campaign was entirely on the national. I don't necessarily wanted to win on the first round, even though that would have given me some prestige. I wanted to get our candidates elected, and it looks like this will happen tonight. We've got 3 of us I can see on the first page of being elected here, 2 of us on 60,000 votes already, and it looks like all 3 on the list will get elected. And if we get a 4th one, that's brilliant as well. What I really want is a stable executive, and I think that can be formed under this election.
Do you think that the substitution of Sinn Féin for Fianna Fáil will lead to a more stable executive?
I think it probably will, because the Fianna Fáil are a more stable party and probably a less radical party, so we're more likely to have a united executive behind the same rules, and we're not just forced to work together.
And what do you think? Do you think that there may be any implications of your vote splitting? Do you think that that maybe some of your transfers might end up playing against you and lead to less candidates being elected, as there has been examples of this in the past with RSF voters electing uni candidates in the past?
Well, that was a risk we took. I feel we've had a quite active campaign with 4 or 5 of our candidates making regular posts, 3 or 4 of them minimum, and me and Comped and Furcoat Blues, who you see on the front, doing many more than that. And the die is cast now, isn't it? See what the voters choose.
Okay. We will indeed. If I could return to the previous topic, which I was trying to insert. Dunks11, your party endorsed the Alliance Party, and it's looking less good for them than it did. Is this disappointing?
I've not been too focused on Northern Ireland. Obviously, I've been running a campaign in Scotland to restore the executive, but I'd obviously hope Alliance do well. We historically have never stood in Northern Ireland, at least not for a very long time, and we historically give our voters instructions to go say, look, vote Alliance are probably your best shot. It's disappointing that they're not currently polling that well, but we're still early on, still a lot of transfers to go, and hopefully we'll see 1 or 2 of them elected to the Assembly.
And why is it that you endorse Alliance over a unionist party, considering the classical Liberals' very hardline unionist stance?
Well, Alliance are the Northern Irish branch of the Liberal Democrats, and, well, the UUP are the branch of the Tories, and DUP, NUP.
I know many members of the UUP and the Alliance who'd be offended by that description.
That is how they function, Flo.
Well, we are technically a part of the National Conservative Party. I think we are given freedom to operate, so we can be seen as, at least in this region, as quite a separate party from the Conservatives at Maine.
That's true. I don't know how you structure yourselves internally, but from my point of view anyway, it is a similar... These parties are the names of the UK parties in Northern Ireland. So the reason why we endorse Alliance over, say, the UP is that we find ourselves more in agreement with the Liberal Democrats, who we form opposition with, rather than the Tories, who we are fighting for an Labservative government of.
But surely the most important part of devolved elections for you is keeping the union intact and ensuring that unionists are elected. So why is it that you elect a party that's stance is quite vague on the union, that they support the succession of Northern Ireland should the people vote by referendum to do so?
Because the the Good Friday Agreement has a clause saying the Secretary of State will grant a referendum if there is sufficient public support. I do not believe that a vote for Alliance constitutes public support for secession from the union. So that is why we decide, let's vote Alliance. If it came down to a border poll, I would very much campaign to remain in, and I would hope that everybody in my party would as well, because we are unionists.
May I say, I do think that you are more aligned with the Alliance Party on economic matters and other political matters, and surely that's more refreshing than the just basic unionist, nationalist, other lines that are drawn.
Well, yeah, of course. If you compare our policies to the Alliance Party, we're probably quite similar in terms of social issues as well, looking at gay rights, LGBT issues, personal freedom.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to come in here because we're heading back over the Irish Sea to Glasgow. And in Glasgow, we've seen a somewhat unsurprising Green hold. The Greens have held Glasgow with a majority of 90,479. The second place candidate being the classical Liberal candidate Zukov 236.
Yes!
And Dunks has just orgasmed. And the Labour Party in third place with Please Don't Yell. The LP UK in fourth, and the Conservatives in fifth with another electoral wipeout, 3,768 votes. This is not looking good for the Conservatives. This could potentially be a complete wipeout for them.
Well, this seems like a very strong result for nationalists, because even if you add the rest of the parties together, they've still won a sizable majority.
You do have to remember though that Glasgow was, I believe it was, Was it a part of Central Scotland before? I'm not quite sure.
Oh, well, it was his own seat before.
Okay, it was his own seat before, but it's
This is the
always
one which
it's always
has not
been
been changed.
extremely strong.
Yes.
Strong for the Greens, extremely
I'm aware
definite.
of
So
that.
this isn't a greatly surprising result.
If the Greens lose Glasgow, they've lost the country. That is it. They've probably lost all of their seats if we ever get to the point where they're losing Glasgow, to be quite
Especially
honest.
as the First Minister standing there.
Yeah. This seat was never really that much in question. I'm delighted that we have gone from, I think, first time we in Glasgow, we polled 1.5%. So, and that was the worst performance we've ever had, other than in Northern Ireland, where one of our candidates described it as a shithole. So
It's
this is
still
very...
pre-watershed, so I'm gonna have to restrain
Sorry,
you.
bleep that
be
out.
gentle,
Yes,
be gentle.
yes. But I'm delighted that we've got on up into second. We've beat Labour, we've beat the Libertarians, and we've beat the Tories. We are the leading challengers to the Greens in Glasgow, as we are across the country.
So, Eels Madge, I know, as we've established previously, you'll be very offended if I tie you to the Conservatives, but I'm going to anyway because you're the best we've got at the moment. So
The only Conservative affiliated candidate round here, yeah.
yes. So can you give some comments on the Conservatives?
Well,
so far?
overall in Scotland, we didn't expect privately to have a very good campaign, and
Mhm.
I think in this seat, we can't expect much more than about 4,000 votes. It's the First Minister's constituency, and they're widely expected to gain. I think it's sad that unionism, or at least our branch of unionism, is having such a struggle in Scotland. I don't think there's ever been a proper unionist majority since we established Stormont. I think that the Conservative Party has been going through quite a few troubles recently with changes of leaders, one of them going off to be Speaker of the House of Commons, etc. I'd like to see, of course, how we do later on in the night, but there's still hope.
Yeah, but it's not looking good so far. So the question now is...
May I say, I haven't actually seen the other results apart from the previous one you've said, the classical Liberal seat, so I am not entirely sure about what happened over the entire country.
Well, generally so far, with the exception of a couple of seats, the Conservatives have polled at around 5,000, 4,000 votes in most seats. It's a fairly consistent... There have been some exceptions. So, for example, in Ayrshire, they've managed to take 33,800. That's their best result so far. But, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to take us back over to Northern Ireland. I'm sure you'll be very interested.
Of course I am.
And we're now on to round 8. Ding, ding! That was out of tune, wasn't it? So, in Northern Ireland...
Get a bell.
Yeah, it was supposed to be a bell. I didn't quite manage it. In Northern Ireland, the second candidate has been elected. It's the SDLP's Comrade Lannister, who sadly is no longer in the studio, so we can't hear him whooping with delight. He's managed to surpass the previous front runner, Zoto 888, who has remained generally quite stationary. His vote share hasn't really increased very much. We've seen, since the last round, some increase for Ulster Unionist candidates, Eels Madge and Comped. Furcoats Blues has remained pretty much stationary.
This was sort of expected because we saw WhatsApp 008 drop out last time round, and obviously the votes have combined. I thank Comrade Lannister on his victory. Unfortunately, this seems to be where they will stop.
Now, if this vote share for the Fianna Fáil remains stationary, this could be quite strange because I don't see anywhere that a party other than the Ulster Unionists could pick up another seat. I think that the vote is too split, that Alliance won't be able to take enough of the vote to win 2 seats, and SDLP have already failed to do so, and the DUP definitely will. So we could see, if that does materialise, that the UUP will hold a majority of seats in Stormont, which would be quite of a constitutional anomaly for Northern Ireland.
Of course, may I just say that if I do get a majority, if my party does get a majority of seats in Northern Ireland, that can't mean that we govern alone. We'll still be instituting power sharing. However, of course, it will mean a bit odd things for cabinet posts, etc. As I said, I've been campaigning nationally more than personally because STV means you can do that. You can spread your candidates out and get many elected on later rounds.
Yes, and do you think that will be a net benefit then, or a net hindrance?
I'm yet to see as yet. I don't know if any UUP candidates have been eliminated. I don't think they have, and we've still got over 300,000 votes. and with 3 of us in the top 7, as you can see here.
Yes, there was initially you had double the votes of your next contender, Fianna Fáil. In fact, over double that. So it's in some degree it's worked. There seems to be much more sheer force. The question is, of course, whether that sheer force will be hindered by the fact that it's more distributed, because even though it's more than double, if you looked at Fianna Fáil's candidates, they've reasonably consistently been showing above you in terms of vote support.
Well, STV is ranked voting, so that means that if you get people eliminated further down the ballot, in theory, then your total vote share as a party should stay relatively similar, as just the least popular ones will get eliminated, and their vote share will progress to the more popular ones. In all my campaigns, I was saying you don't necessarily have to vote for me first choice, as long as you vote for the Ulster Unionists and then me, so we can get a situation like this where many of us are elected on later rounds.
There seems to be a degree of cross-partisanship we've been talking about, and generally Northern Irish politics has changed a lot in recent years. So do you find it plausible that perhaps nationalist voters would eventually rank you as an option?
I mean, of course, it's always possible, and I mean that's why we have STV. We think that people are much better than parties in Northern Ireland, and that's how the Good Friday Agreement was solved. I would be lower down the ballot. I'm sure that it would be possible for me to put down other candidates apart from the UUP. And our campaign was to make Northern Ireland less sectarian. So, I mean, it's perfectly possible the UUP people vote for Fianna Fáil and the opposite as well. That's all I have to say, really.
And Dunks, as an outsider, how do you view sectarianism in Northern Ireland? Do you think it's declined significantly? Do you think the threads are still there? Oh, I think
years ago,
okay.
You had the UVF throwing bombs at the nationalist community. You had the IRA throwing bombs at the unionist community and trying to assassinate our prime minister. So it's definitely gone down, and that can only be a good thing. There are obviously still little bits of it here and there, but on the whole, it's going down. And in my view, what politicians in Northern Ireland need to do is work to get rid of the last elements of it, and power sharing helps for that. But I do think that in the long term, once Northern Ireland is nice cross-community, things like power sharing are ultimately sectarianism designed to curb further sectarianism. In no other country in the world, barring probably a few little outliers, do we have a system like that. So I would hope that within my lifetime anyway, we can see Northern Ireland return to a normal system of government.
And what do you think needs to be done before the Good Friday Agreement in its form is no longer necessary? The power sharing is no longer necessary. What changes have to happen?
That is a very complex question, and I am truthfully not qualified to answer that to any degree. What I will say is that we need better sort of cross-community understanding. People in the nationalist community need to know and understand, be friends, be neighbours, be allies with people in the unionist community, and vice versa. So things like sort of cross-community schooling, abolishing sort of religious schools, effectively, where there's an old saying somewhere that you can tell what school a Northern Irish person went to, you can tell what community they're from by what school they went to. If they say it's since whatever, they're a Catholic and a nationalist. Okay. So I think if we get into that and break down that system and have a system where, yes, you can have different views on the constitution, all that we've got that in Scotland, we've got that in Wales, and there's Catalonia, etc. as well. But I think there is certainly a trend towards non-sectarianism, which is very good.
Okay, so we're going back to Scotland, to Dumbarton and Renfrew. In Dumbarton and Renfrew, we've seen the SNP gaining from the Scottish Labour Party with a majority of 4,126. Again, the map is looking disgusting. And so this is Wired Cookie 1 for the SNP, who has beaten out Vending Machine King, who I believe is Scottish Labour leader. He definitely was when I was in there.
He was. Yes.
And Paul Rand in third place. It really is a three-way split. And we've seen the Conservatives and the SUP collapse here. This is it's not
Quite a
fun.
low
for
turnout as well.
What I'd say is worth noting here is that Vending Machine King was endorsed by the Greens as well.
Interesting. So they
Okay.
didn't go for the SNP. Interesting.
We're going to
No.
bring on another guest right now, Zoto888, the leader of the People's Action Party.
This
Hello.
should be good.
Hello.
Oh,
Good evening. So, what are your takes on the results so far?
Well, obviously it's a bit.
Oh,
Sorry about that.
did your mic just fall over?
Yeah, I did. Obviously, it's a bit of a disappointing night, but not entirely unexpected. Just give me 1 second. Go to someone else.
Wow, that was
Get your opinion on this, Dunks, further.
the result in Dumbarton and Renfrew.
yes.
It's certainly interesting that the SNP have still, despite a Green endorsement for Labour, managed to gain the seat. I note the strong Libertarian performance as well. Their leader there on a very decent vote share, beating the Tories and the SUP, and coming about 7,000 votes away from taking the seat. So good performance to them as well.
And so far, it doesn't look like the cross-party pact you've had with the Libertarians and Liberal Democrats has been entirely successful. I mean, you've managed to succeed with one seat, but there aren't that many seats left, really.
No, we've had our success in Angus, Perth and Stirling, and that's good. I would obviously like to have each and every one of our seats was coming up purple, grey or orange, but they're not. And, I mean, packs can only do so much. They amplify a bit of vote, but they need something else as well. And to be perfectly candid here, the other parties in the pact didn't have such a sort of strong term time performance, and that's probably reflected in the results. I think that if we were to say go for it in SP4 after a strong term for all of us, then it would go and be incredibly effective. Basically, every seat would go to the pact, but they can only do so much in and of themselves.
Okay, we're going to have another go with Zoto. Hopefully his mic's working now.
This should be better. Just tell me if there's anything wrong with it, and I should try and sort it out.
Okay, you sound fine. You sound fine. So, what are your thoughts on your party's performance?
Overall, about as awful as I could have expected.
Oh dear.
Well, wasn't really expecting for the past few days to actually win a seat. It's more just to bring to light the problems faced by the Scottish nation and the Scottish people.
But I assume you're more pleased with the results in Northern Ireland. Yes.
Yes, yeah, of course. It's always good to see fellow lovers of Celtic freedom get elected.
So it's interesting to
see
note.
such a
It's interesting to
result.
note that this Labour loss. This was the finance minister in Scotland, and the budget was much criticised because it was broadly identical to the previous budget, with some mild spending changes. For example, with the clean-up from the volcanic eruption costed in, but broadly the same. And then it failed. So there is now a huge Scottish deficit because their tax rates have reset to UK norm. So that's an interesting point to note, that it's his seat that's lost here. So perhaps that plays a role. But we're going to go to Edinburgh, and we'll see if that trend.
Sorry, could you just say that again?
We're going to Edinburgh.
Okay.
So here we've seen the Greens manage to hold on to Edinburgh. We've seen the second place candidate, classical Liberal candidate, significantly behind, 26,849 votes. And the Libertarians have come into third place, and then it's a rough night for the remaining four parties here. The Conservatives, Labour, Scotland First and PAP have both suffered quite significantly here.
So the first thing I want to note is that there's probably been damage done to the classical Liberals and or the LP UK by both parties standing, because combined they would easily have overtaken Greens.
Yes, that's a very valid point there.
That is disappointing that we weren't able to do the pact there. I don't think we actually expected to do that well in Edinburgh at the start of the campaign, so credit to the candidate there. And you know, in the future maybe we'll see that go into the Liberty Pact as well.
Okay, well, it's been lovely to talk to you, Dunks. We're going to have a go at going one down the chain and swapping you out for C. Docra, who I believe was the candidate in Aberdeen. Hello, Docra.
Hello.
Ah, good to have you with us. So what are your readings on the results? Let's start with Scotland.
Well, I think the classical Liberals in particular have done very well in Scotland. Obviously, it's a lot of people were doubting us over the course of it. A lot of nationalist politicians in particular were trying to keep the classical Liberals down at every turn, but we've produced a very good result in Angus, Perth and Stirling, and we've also produced very good second place results in my own constituency of Aberdeen, and also in places like Edinburgh and Glasgow, where we weren't predicted to do as well as we really have done.
Okay, and I know I'm asking a slightly biased source here, but when we've seen the Conservatives collapse, where do you think their votes are going to? Are these voters not showing up? Are they drifting to other parties?
I think the classical Liberals in particular are the natural home for a lot of Conservative voters. We're broadly centre-right and the Conservatives are broadly centre-right. We're Unionist, the Conservatives are Unionist. And the Conservatives have always had a broadly sort of common sense, vaguely liberal base that I believe the classical Liberals can tap into effectively, and certainly there's no evidence they were going to other unionist parties in a lot of places. My constituency and other constituencies don't really show that.
Zoto, would you concur?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Would you concur with what Doctor was just saying, that disenfranchised Conservative voters, their natural home becomes the classical Liberals?
I don't think that that's the case at all. I think that can certainly be one home for them, and it has been the home in this case, but I don't think to say it is their natural home. Their natural home is in the Party for Scotland, which is, well, currently it's split between multiple parties. The Scottish National Party pretend to hold that role, the Scottish Green Party try to, but really no party can really be said to be the natural home of the people of Scotland, no matter what their political views are.
No, I'm not talking about the natural home of Scotland in total. I'm just merely referring to Scottish Conservative voters who clearly have been pretty disenfranchised.
They are people of Scotland, and therefore they have no home.
Okay, we're going to move on to Northern Ireland once again. I'm sure you'll be very excited to hear that, Zoto. In Northern Ireland, we've reached round 14, which is a hell of a speed up, and we've had multiple candidates elect at this point. From here, the Ulster Unionists have managed to secure 4 seats. And from there, the next runner-up is Fianna Fáil with 2 seats. So Zoto 888, you have been elected there as well. DUP have picked up a seat with their candidate Angela Merkel. Alliance with their candidate Esteban. And the SDLP have managed to pick up 1 seat, as said earlier. So the counting has now finished in Northern Ireland. It's over.
Well, I'm certainly happy about that. Yes, thank you.
I feel like there's a slight biased base here, so I'm going to try and drag us over to Docra before it turns into a circle jerk. Docra, what are your thoughts on these results?
I think that obviously Fianna Fáil are a new party, and I think they've done incredibly well for themselves given the circumstances. They were born in very new. Barely before the election they came into being, and they've already shot up to become, at the moment, the second biggest party out of all the parties elected. Obviously, the fall of Sinn Féin has helped them a lot. They have appeared to have come out as the natural home for nationalists in Northern Ireland. They have appealed to quite a broad base, it looks like, as well. Obviously, sort of vaguely centre-y sort of platform that can appeal to everyone on the nationalist side, and they appear to have gotten a lot of people on, and that appears to have benefited them massively, perhaps to the detriment of a lot of centrists in Alliance, it looks like, but they've done especially well for themselves, and I think they will be the big story of the night.
Yes, it's they have certainly managed to recapture the nationalist vote from the Sinn Féin party. Admittedly, they if we were to just take it as written that, for example, Sinn Féin and Fianna Fáil were somehow the same, which of course is not the truth, then it would be a decline of 1 seat. But still, for a new party to manage to secure 2 out of 3 of those seats isn't bad.
I'm going to break our two-guest rule here for a second and bring in the Deputy First Minister and Leader of UEP, who has also just been elected. Congratulations to Ilse Madge.
Well, thank you very much. This is, as I said, our tactic of getting unionists elected down the ballot, so more of them will be elected, has certainly paid off. We've got 4 seats, and with the DUP, there is now a majority of Stormont that is unionist, which of course will govern a cross-party way, but this shows that unionism is certainly on the rise in Northern Ireland.
So, I mean, it practically goes without saying, but what do you think is the most likely executive to form from here?
You ask me, I'm probably the kingmaker here, aren't I? As you know, I have attacked the SDLP at times during the campaign, and I know that Fianna Fáil has. I think possibly I'll consider all the options as well. Obviously, Fianna Fáil has to be in the executive. I think probably our most likely option for the other candidate will probably be Esteban from the Alliance, but again, I'm open to all parties.
Likewise.
Oh yes, and we've just been informed that there is a recount occurring in the Borders seat. And this news has come to us slightly late, but there's been a recount that was announced some time ago in the Borders seat. It was said to be very close to call, a few hundred votes in it.
Between which parties?
I'm afraid we don't have that information this time. We don't have that information this time, I'm afraid.
So coming back to what Jack said earlier about, and others said earlier about Fianna Fáil, I think that it's very impressive that they picked up the 2 seats they did, and not entirely unexpected because, of course, nationalist forces have always been strong in Northern Ireland, and Sinn Féin previously had 3, and I'm guessing that most Sinn Féin voters went to Fianna Fáil. But of course, if both of their candidates stood and both of them got elected, then well done on them. We've got a 50% hit rate, they've got a 100% hit rate.
The only party to pull that off as well.
Yeah, I can't hide how pleased I am with our results in Northern Ireland. I thought this would work, and it did. Of course, I'm sad about not having personally reached the threshold, but that's not what matters under STV. And I believe the other 4 candidates, or the other 4 or 5, were mostly that weren't elected, were mostly Ulster Unionists along there. So I'm glad that I went for the decision that we made all the choices to get these candidates elected with as many choices as possible.
Yes,
because
thank you very much for that insight. I'm afraid I'm going to have to cut into you because we are going to the Highlands and Islands, the first seat that previously had a recount announced. Highlands and Islands, the SNP have gained this seat from the Liberal Democrats. This has probably been the Liberal Democrats' most strong showing tonight, but it wasn't quite enough. A majority of 1,266. Stylinomics has been elected over the Lib Dem candidate Bloody Country. With
this has always been quite an interesting seat, isn't it? Wasn't it this seat last time round that went to Lib Dems by 7 votes?
Yes, this was an extremely now. I believe it was Scottish Unionists at the time, but that is certainly no longer the case here. Their candidate has dropped to 843.
And we have another relatively strong result for the PAP. That's probably 3 results where they've taken their deposits back, and if they get a large enough showing in these northern constituencies, they could take one of the list seats.
Yes, that's not bad at all. I believe that's the largest of their votes so far.
Yeah, 18,000 was their last one.
Yes, so this seems to be the peak they've reached tonight. So by no means a poor result for them. And this is looking very rough for the Lib Dems. I mean, it looks like they'll probably secure a list vote, judging by this constituency result, although it's very hard to tell. As I say, it's not looking good for them. And again, looking pretty poor for the Conservatives. Their candidate, Soudal, only receiving 3,415 votes. I guess he didn't quite whip the local electorate into his favour. So you can see why this went to a recount. This is, it's not dead on, but it's reasonably close.
I think this has been very unfortunate for the Lib Dems. Not just here, obviously, although this is a seat the Lib Dems were very much hoping to hold on to, but the Lib Dems, as well as really every other unionist party apart from the classical Liberals seem to be losing a lot in this election in Scotland, and it's very unfortunate that the Lib Dems, obviously a party that my party, the classical Liberals, are very close with. I'm very sad to see them do so badly in this election, in this seat in particular, but I'm sure it's very narrow. I'm sure they can bring it back in the future.
I'd just say that the Lib Dems, of course, are very unfortunate in this seat in the sense of the luck of who got the majority overall. I hope that the Unionists pick up quite a lot of votes on the list seats, and many people were not predicting the SNP to get more than 3 seats, and the Greens to get, well, more than 4, I'm guessing, but I think that there will be a lot of Unionists elected on the list.
Yes, it looks like there's going to be a degree of unionist reliance on the list, but of course that's why it's there. Anyway, so we've now completed the region of Highlands, Tayside, and Fife, and so we'll now be able to look and see if that's panned out. And so we've seen that the list results are as follows: Scottish National Party, Classical Liberals, Scottish Liberal Democrats, Scottish Conservatives, Scottish Labour. And that follows on from the SNP managing to win 2 constituency seats and the Classical Liberals 1. So even with that divisor effect, they still managed to secure seats. So that's quite an impressive showing for those 2 parties. And this has saved the Lib Dems and Conservatives from a complete wipeout.
This is really good for the Scottish Nationalists. This is more than I think any of the polling companies predicted, and like 2 or 3 of them this time round.
Yes, now it's not unfeasible from this point to consider that there might be a pure nationalist majority here, because previously the Greens and the SNP, although it was previously an SNP candidate who later joined the Greens grouping.
In fact, if they win 2 more seats, they've got a majority.
Yeah, if they have an outright majority, then what does that mean for the union? Docra, for example, should we go with?
I think that if a majority does come to the Nationalists, it's certainly not out of the question. I think we're not there yet. I would never ever wish in my wildest dreams to even imagine such a horrible possibility before it is thrust upon us. But we have seen in this election nationalists being more vocally attacking unionists, and unionists in a lot of places being more vocally attacking of nationalists. It's become very divided. I think, especially from the SNP, we're likely to see pushes for a second independence referendum. I think it's unfortunately likely that the Greens, having less power in this coalition that looks like they were going to beforehand, with the SNP holding a larger percentage of the seats in a potential government, they're probably going to be dragged along with it. Obviously, they're a nationalist party themselves. And I think that even in that dreadful scenario, the Scottish people would vote to remain in the Union. But I think this does present a very, very awful situation for the people of Scotland if a majority nationalist government pans out.
Yes, it's certainly interesting to note that partisanship has decreased in Northern Ireland and increased in Scotland.
And joining us in studio now is a Libertarian Party UK member, Eric the Rod. Hello.
Right.
Hello.
Hello. I'm afraid I'm going to have to cut in before we go any further, because we do have another result. This is the Borders, a seat that went to recount earlier. And we've seen the Conservatives managed to hold this seat just narrowly, with a majority of 401 votes against the Greens' Glorious Zinn. And the NUP are showing the only seat, I believe, so far that wasn't a complete wash for them. With they've come in 3rd place, their candidate Britboy 3456, securing 21,892 votes. This is a very close call for the Conservatives. But they've managed to get some blue on the map, so I'm sure they'll be pleased about that.
Yeah, I think the NUP would be very concerned if they'd taken this seat for the nationalists inadvertently, and I'm sure the Tory leader is breathing a massive sigh of relief. And this does show the extent of the Tory damage in Scotland, that their leader, who's been very active, who's said a lot of good things, even they are at the mercy of this absolute wave against the Conservatives in Scotland. This is very bad for them, even if they did hold the seat.
So if we go over to our resident libertarian now, this is a less pleasing result than perhaps has been previously seen. What are your thoughts on this seat?
On this seat, I think we're pretty happy still that we've managed to grow, and we're doing good.
Yeah, you've certainly managed to secure a reasonable placement, although perhaps your party's strategy of cooperating with other Liberal parties in a pact system hasn't entirely paid off, because out of the whole pact, only one party succeeded in succeeding a first past the post seat. In fact, your party managed to lose in quite a nasty landslide to a Scottish Green candidate.
Yeah, I guess it's a small loss for us, but still happy.
So if the LP UK managed to secure a seat in the list, there's still one list region to go. Where do they sit? Who do they work with?
I'm not going to comment on that as of now.
Fair enough. So as I say, we are just waiting for the remaining list, which will hopefully reveal the balance of power in the Scottish Parliament. But it's certainly
Very
not.
exciting.
Oh yes. The question, of course, remains: will the Nationalists be pushed over to have an outright majority? I believe they need. Is it 9 seats in the new Parliament size?
10 seats.
10 seats. So they'll need to gain 2 more seats in order to have an outright majority. Otherwise, they'll probably end up relying on a non-nationalist party, perhaps Labour, perhaps the Liberal Democrats. But it looks like their position could become much more cemented if the Greens and the SNP end up working together, which seems quite likely based on their electoral deal they reached.
Now, something we could see materialising here is that the SNP could actually eclipse the Greens, because the Greens have already won a substantial amount of the first past the post seats in this region, so they could be locked out of the list. And if the SNP take one list seat, which I reckon they probably will, then that could result in the SNP eclipsing the Greens. So I think that we will have a nationalist First Minister, but it's really up in the air as to who's going to be supporting them. And if the Greens are awarded by this list, it could be that the SNP and the Greens both gain a seat, and then they'll have a majority. But it will still be quite interesting to see who will be chosen as the First Minister if both parties are on equal seats.
And if the SNP have managed to oust the First Minister, for want of a better term, does that soil relations with them, or do you think it's still a perfectly viable coalition?
I very much doubt it. I think the SNP and the Greens are very close as parties, and I think that they will continue to cooperate.
Yes, of course, in previous elections, the SNP have actually merged into the Greens, but they won't be regretting not merging in this time, because they've certainly had a far better result than was expected.
Absolutely. It's a huge victory for nationalists, I think, better than they've done in any Holyrood election since the Parliament's reintroduction.
Yes, and it certainly seems to have been a rough night, perhaps, for Unionists. Although we've seen a growth of the classical Liberals, sort of as contrasted by a decline of the Conservatives. So the question now is, with the Clibs, Conservatives, and Labour tied on 2 seats, who becomes the main unionist voice? And that we are about to find out, because we now have the results in from Strathclyde and the Borders, which is the final electoral list seat region. And here we've seen the Scottish Greens have gained 2 more seats, despite already holding 2 in this region. The Libertarian Party United Kingdom have gained a seat, and the Classical Liberals have gained a seat. So the Libertarians have been saved from a complete wipeout, although the Scottish Unionist Party has been completely wiped out, losing their single seat. The final Parliament result has the Greens as the largest party with 6 seats, the Scottish Nationalist Party is the second party with 4 seats, the Classical Liberals with 3 seats, Conservatives and Labour tied on 2, Liberal Democrats and Libertarians tied on 1.
this latest set of results obviously good from a classical liberal standpoint. We have 3 seats now. This has tripled our power in Holyrood, but we are very unhappy that this is likely to produce a majority nationalist government, and that's probably not going to be very good for the people of Scotland.
It's been a far more seismic result than was present in Northern Ireland. The Greens have gone from 3 seats to 6 seats. Labour has stood still. Liberal Democrats have lost a seat. Conservatives have lost a seat. Classical Liberals have gained 2 seats. SNP have gained 3 seats. Libertarians stood still. NUP lost a seat.
Did you say that the Greens gained 3 seats?
Yes, they've gone from 3 to 6.
Oh, of course, but there was less people in the last Holyrood Parliament.
Yes, it is important to note, of course, that the Parliament has expanded. So relative voting power isn't as great an increase. But that's still quite an increase. You know, they've doubled their seat share.
Okay, and I'm going to bring in someone who must be very happy this evening, Weebrew, Deputy Principal Speaker of the Greens. Do we have Weebrew?
Hello, hello, hello.
Hi there. You must be very happy with these results.
Happy does not describe it. I'm ecstatic.
And do you see yourselves immediately forming a coalition with the SNP?
I would hope so. That is definitely what the punters are saying. It seems like a reasonable, logical choice. The people of Scotland, as every politician will say at this point, have voted. And despite your friend from CLIB saying that it would be bad for the people just voted for it.
Will Parliament now be receiving a unilateral declaration of independence, or is it not quite there? I know you're probably writing it out at the moment.
Yeah, we're passing it over to Prime Minister now. No, of course. The first thing the Parliament will be receiving is an emergency budget. I think that is the most reasonable thing if everything pans out the way that everyone is saying it will. That's something I'm pretty sure we can guarantee.
And to contrast the very delighted Weber, we're going to bring in someone who might be disillusioned with these results. Zoto, you're back again after your People's Action Party failed to win any seats. What's your comment on this?
That is broadly what was expected here. As I said earlier, when I first came on, it was mostly just an attempt to get issues raised in the campaign that nobody was considering, and nobody has been considering for the past 100 years of oppression.
Such as?
Such as the nature of a Scottish nation inside a supposed British United Kingdom.
Was that not brought up in the Indie Ref, though?
No, because that was an issue of independence, not an issue of the existence of whether a nation exists. A nation can exist without a state.
Okay.
That issue was not raised at all and has not been raised.
Well, that was a deep dive and a half. So what are your thoughts on the change of parliamentary dynamics? It was in the Greens gained massively. The Classical Liberals are now the main. Well, they're certainly the first unionist party, but they're in 3rd place in total. Do you not see this as still a fairly heavy challenge to Scotland's place in the Union, regardless of whether there's a national identity behind it, as you would submit there isn't?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily relevant. Sorry, 1 second. Yeah, I mean, it could be, but have you seen any evidence that this government has any intention of challenging the Union?
Well, they're openly nationalist. That's their official party position.
What actual actions have you seen?
Well, their hands are somewhat tied. They did have a referendum only a few years ago.
So then no, you've answered your own question there, haven't you? If there's nothing that they can do, and as you say, their hands are tied, then they pose no threat.
Well, you talk about national identity. We've actually brought through a lot of bills promoting one of the key aspects of our national identity, which is our culture and our language. You've seen the Gaelic bill that passed a couple of terms ago. You can't say we've not done anything national.
Gaelic bill, yes.
Right, yeah, but you can't say we've not done anything nationalist. It's a bit wrong.
That's not entirely what I was saying. I was saying that you don't pose a threat to the status quo, because you don't.
Tell that to the people who voted in the welfare devolution referendum. We are bringing progressive change, and that's why we're getting voted in.
So now you can have the same policies decided at Holyrood as were being decided at Westminster.
Well, what would you
policy
rather? A
difference will
Tory
there be?
government decide welfare policies on the Scottish people, or the Scottish government decide welfare policies from the Scottish people?
Given your track record, I don't think you can decide any policies, given how your budget spectacularly failed, and we've lost what, a third to a half of the value of the Scottish Wealth Fund.
Well, actually, a lot of the money was going to go back into the Scottish Wealth Fund. We took $1 billion out to deal with the volcanic ash, and we actually were going to put $3 billion back in with that budget. It's thanks to the opponent that voted. Yeah, that was because the opponents have voted down the bill.
I agree with you.
It's nothing we could do. We put the bill forward.
Well, you were the one who proposed the bill. It's your duty
Yeah.
to make it acceptable, not to blame the opposition for opposing. That's a laughable idea.
It's their job to do that. They voted for the deficit that we now see. And as I said, we're going to bring forward, if we get in government and everything that we've been talking about happens, we'll bring forward an emergency budget and we'll take things and continue our progressive agenda that for Scotland that has been working and still will.
Okay, well, I'm afraid I'm going to have to step in there because with the end of the results coming in, it's the end of the stream. So thank you all for joining. Thank you to Jack for stepping in and being able to co-host. Thank you to all the guests for showing up, including the ones in the room now, who have no doubt will get a big head from all my praise. Thank you to Dunks11 for the stunning graphics as ever, and a very good night to everyone.